Step 1. Make the movie enjoyable. Now, some may argue that Batman v Superman had a deep and meaningful story that you just have to really pay attention to get all of it, or maybe even watch it a second time. But it's really hard to sit through such a dreadful movie 2 times. Now, the thing that Zack Snyder doesn't seem to understand about this is that there's a big difference between being serious and just being heartless and joyless. So the thing that Batman v Superman really needed was to just be enjoyable. Now, we're not talking about trying to make it like some cartoon, and we're not even talking about trying to make it like a Marvel movie. Even among DC's own films, we have examples of movies that were serious, yet at the same time they were enjoyable. The Dark Knight is one very good example of that, and I think the main reason that it was such an enjoyable movie is that we cared about all of the characters. Now, a problem that Batman v Superman had was that it spent the majority of its time trying to build up the rivalry between Batman and Superman, and so the focus the entire time was on giving each of those characters reasons to hate the other character. And so as it constantly forced that point, it gave the audience reasons to hate both of them too. There was nothing that it presented that made the characters likable or made you want to care about them. Now, many people may have been rooting for either Batman or Superman, but that was more than likely just their childhood nostalgia. The fact that they had grown up with these characters that made them care about them, and not the movie itself. The movie, though, really needs to earn our care on its own merits. If these characters were not ones that we had been familiar with for decades, it would be very hard to say that we would really be rooting for either one of them. And so that's what the movie needs to do. It needs to focus on reasons for us to care about the characters. And once we care about them, it will really make what they're going through more interesting and make us want to see what happens next. And then it would become more enjoyable. At the same time, some lighthearted moments would definitely not be bad in this movie either. It seemed that there were very, very few of those throughout the film. So while the film was attempting to be serious the whole time, perhaps even thought-provoking, it ended up just being a very, very exhausting movie. Step 2. Ease up on the film score. Now, just like with the serious nature of this film, the music for this movie was just exhausting. In fact, the only time I remember liking the soundtrack was when they redid the Man of Steel theme. Now, the soundtrack for the Man of Steel movie was just epic, like all the way through. But the soundtrack for Batman v Superman was not. It was just loud and aggressive, and it felt more like it was intended to give the audience a headache than anything. As a matter of fact, the only music I specifically remember aside from the original Man of Steel theme was the organ playing when Lex walked into the Kryptonian wreck, and that was just very, very definitely loud, and that is like the only reason I actually remember it. I feel like if they had just stuck with the original Man of Steel theme and done variations off of that, it would have made for a much more enjoyable soundtrack than the one that we actually got. Step 3. Only include world building when it's relevant to the plot. Now, when you look at the Batman v Superman movie, it seemed like almost every aspect that had to do with the Justice League was shoehorned into the plot and was almost completely inconsequential for the actual story. Now, when we think about world building, we can look at the Marvel movies for both good and bad examples. Now, on the good side, we have the introduction of Hawkeye in the Thor movie. Now, the scene that Hawkeye was in would have existed with or without him. They did not try to twist the plot to try to include him in that film. They simply took advantage of the plot they had to introduce him as a new character. On the bad side, though, we have the movie Avengers: Age of Ultron. Now, a great deal of that movie had nothing to do with the plot of the actual movie. There were very many scenes that were included simply to establish the next Thor and Avengers sequel. They were not related to what was going on, and they very much felt out of place in that film. Sadly, this movie feels very much like Age of Ultron in that regard. And it's also important for movies, if they're going to be building up mysteries, they really need to have an actual payoff for those mysteries. And that payoff should ideally be in the movie you're actually watching. And if they're not going to have that, they need to make it obvious that they're establishing a story thread or a character that's going to be picked up in a future film. It shouldn't be something that the audience does not understand. It really doesn't do any good to include scenes that are completely unexplained and totally confusing for those that are watching them. And the nightmare scene in Batman v Superman is a very good example of this. Now, apparently, that scene, that dream that Bruce Wayne was having, is a memory of the future, or a possible future, where Superman turns evil and is working for Darkseid. And that memory apparently came to Bruce through the Speed Force as the Flash was traveling back in time to give him a warning about this future. Now, how do we know all that? Well, definitely not from watching the movie, because the movie never explains that scene whatsoever. So that's a perfect example of a scene that should not be included if you're not going to do it right and explain what it's about. Not only is it confusing, but if we knew that this was a potential future if Batman was not successful in assembling the Justice League, it would add so much more weight to everything else that happens in the movie. You would care about whether or not he was successful. So that scene, to make it work, needs to be included in a way where it actually reveals things to the audience. And one way that could be done is by focusing just on that one dream, because Bruce Wayne had a lot of dreams in this movie. But if we just focus on that one and expand on it, it would make a lot more sense. And so we take away all the other dreams that Batman had and just give a little bit of that dream at a time to the audience. It can be like an ongoing nightmare that Bruce Wayne is having throughout the entire film. And maybe even at the end of each little bit of the nightmare that he has, he wakes up to someone yelling his name. And of course later we find out that that is the Flash trying to contact him. And so the nightmare could be shown in little pieces at a time, perhaps even in reverse order, Christopher Nolan style. And there's no real reason why it can't be in reverse order, since these memories are coming backwards from the future. So as an audience, the first thing we would see is an evil Superman attacking Bruce Wayne. And so we think that's just a manifestation of Bruce's subconscious, an idea of what could happen if Superman was left unchecked. And then we start to go backwards. And piece by piece we see the whole thing, the battle on the alien world, and everything else that's going on, and we realize that there's more to these dreams than just Batman's own fear. And then there's that constant voice each time at the end of the nightmare calling out to Bruce Wayne. So by the end, you see the Omega symbol, and then finally the Flash gets through and gives his warning about Darkseid, and he could even name off some of the Avengers as well. And so Batman, by this point in the movie, is thinking, hey, I've been worried about Superman this whole time. I just had a dream about him being evil. He must have been talking about Superman's dark side. And so he sees this as even more of a reason to go and attack Superman. But then later on, after the movie is over and Batman is seeing Lex in prison, he could hear Lex Luthor ramble on about Darkseid, and he realizes that there's more to his dreams than he was thinking. And so at this point, the audience and Batman have connected the dots together and have figured out that Darkseid is this evil force that's going to be coming to the Earth, and that Batman needs to assemble the Justice League in order to save the planet. Step 4. Make a coherent plot that you can actually understand just by watching the movie. Now, a lot of people might be saying that Batman v Superman is a movie that only people who are into comic books would understand, but that doesn't really justify what we got in this movie. That'd be like taking a novel and turning it into a film and then saying that to be able to understand that film, you have to read the whole book. And the thing is that these are completely different mediums, and if your understanding of the movie depends on reading something else, then you have failed at your job as a screenwriter or as a director, because your entire job is telling a story through film. And so what the movie really should be doing is laying out the stakes for the audience and helping them to understand the new world that they've entered. So going back to that dream sequence, by the time we're done seeing those dreams, we should know that there's this big bad guy coming, and that the only way to stop him is by assembling the Justice League. Now that is a very, very simple point, a clear point, a concise point, and something that you will not get just by watching this movie, because it is completely incoherent. And it would also be beneficial to cut out a bit of the fluff and just make the story more streamlined. For example, we could start with Lex Luthor having access to the Kryptonian crash site because his company has like a government contract to see what they can learn from it and try to reverse engineer some of that technology. And then Lex could use this technology to identify all of the metahumans on the planet. And so then he's built files for every single one of them using this technology that he has access to. And it's because of this that Wonder Woman starts to notice that she is being followed and people are documenting stuff about her. And it's also through this technology that Lex learns the identities of Batman and Superman, and that he obtains kryptonite and finds the designs to make some undefeatable Kryptonian warrior, and finds out about Darkseid. It all works together in one single plot point, that Lex has had access to this Kryptonian wreck the entire time. And so we can see him making contact with Darkseid and then putting his plans into motion, trying to rid the world of all the metahumans and using his technology to prepare himself for the attack of Darkseid. And this really helps put together all of the storylines for Bruce Wayne as well. He knows that Lex has access to the wreck, so he probably has information on how to defeat Kryptonians, and so he goes and breaks into his computers to try to find that information. And while he's looking through that information, he finds all the information on the other superpowered beings on the planet. And seeing their names could remind him of the nightmares that he had been having, if we showed the Flash mentioning names of members of the Justice League during those nightmares. And so he realizes at that point that there's more to those dreams than just being simple nightmares of possible futures that he could experience. And then he finds the information on kryptonite and how to weaponize it, and that's what he uses for his attack on Superman. Step 5. Develop better character motivations. Now, there are a lot of characters in this movie that need their motivations to be more developed, or at the very least, just better explained to the audiences. So let's start with Lex Luthor. Now, Lex Luthor's actions in this movie leave us with a lot of questions. I mean, what was his actual goal? If he was concerned with the very existence of superpowered beings, then why did he go and create another one? Why was he willing to accept Darkseid with open arms if he was so worried about someone more powerful than he was being on the planet? And if his goal was to just have Batman and Superman kill each other, why did he go and start creating Doomsday before they had even started fighting? And if his only concern was Superman, then what was it about Superman that he hated so much? And if he knew the secret identities of both Batman and Superman, that would really open up a lot of possibilities to him that the movie doesn't explore. He could have went public with their names. Well, he even had them at a party of his, standing right in front of him. He could have used some knockout gas laced with kryptonite and taken them both out at once. So how could Lex Luthor's motivations have been better developed in this movie? Well, the movie could have shown him as being opportunistic, just trying to be on the side of whoever is in power. And that would have been very similar to Superman 2 with Zod, but in this case, it would have been with Doomsday. Or the movie could have just gone the route of showing him hating Superman and wanting to do whatever he can to have him killed. But for the sake of argument, let's say he's just someone who always wants to end up on top. He grew up with an abusive father, and that made him cold and manipulative. And so he learned how to play people against each other, as he did with his mother and father. And now his father is dead and his mother's in prison, but he doesn't care because he got what he wants. And there is a little foreshadowing. So now he realizes that both Superman and Batman could stop any plans that he might have in the future. And so he needs them out of the picture. As he's attempting to come up with a plan, he learns that Darkseid is coming, and so he agrees to work with Darkseid to further his own agendas. And he knows that when Darkseid comes, he won't be the most powerful person on the planet again. But he figures that if Darkseid wants Superman dead, and he is able to kill Superman, then that means that he is more powerful than Darkseid as well. And so once Darkseid arrives, he'll just be able to use his abilities, his technology, to kill Darkseid and end up on top again. So by the end of the film, his plan has failed because Doomsday was less controllable than he expected, and now he's in jail. And now he's freaking out because Batman is still around, he's in jail, he knows that Darkseid is coming, and there's absolutely nothing he can do about it anymore. He's stuck in jail, and all of his plans for the future have fallen apart. And so he goes off on Batman, completely frightened out of his mind. And Batman realizes that the Darkseid that Lex is talking about is an actual being. And that is what his dreams were about. And so now he knows that he has to assemble the Justice League to stop Darkseid. Now let's talk about Lois Lane. Now, instead of trying to weave her into the entire plot, let's try to give her a simple, extremely meaningful story arc. Now we can stay with the idea that she's trying to investigate whatever is going on, and that investigation will eventually lead to Lex Luthor. But let's include the idea that she is starting to take advantage of Superman. And she doesn't even realize that she's doing it at the beginning. But every time she goes out and risks her life and Superman has to come save her, there are people that are in danger and that are dying that Superman cannot get to because he is busy saving Lois Lane. So by the end of the film, he is incapacitated by Batman. And so she's in this situation and she has to save herself. And she realizes that there are more important things in the world than her, and that every time she makes Superman come rescue her, she is keeping him from saving other people. So now we have Superman at the point of dying, and it's her turn to make up for all of that. And she goes and risks herself to try to save him, stepping between him and Batman, and switching the way it's been for the entire rest of the movie. Now, how about Wonder Woman? Well, actually, it's really hard to say if there are any changes that Wonder Woman would need, because we don't know what her motivation is. We won't know what it was that made her lose her faith in humanity until the solo film comes out. So we can't really do anything about her character arc in that respect. But there is one thing that we can focus on, and it's something that we are going to be addressing with Batman and Superman as well. And that is about building up the team. And if we want the decision for them to start working together and join forces to feel organic, then we have to have moments where they realize that they have things they can learn from each other. And so from that, they realize that there is something that every one of them can offer to the team. So in this case, as they're fighting, Wonder Woman needs to see something in both Batman and Superman that makes her regain her faith in humanity. And that could be their ability to get past their grudges against each other and realize that they're better off working together. Whatever it is, though, it's something that needs to be obvious to the audience that she sees and that she admires and appreciates. And just as she sees things in them that she admires, they need to see things in her as well. And that can be her burning desire to do good against impossible odds. Step 6. Give both Batman and Superman solid motivations to fight. Now, their motivations should move them to fight whether Lex Luthor threatens Superman's mom or not. In fact, he shouldn't really do that at all. Superman can find Lois Lane on the other side of the planet and save her, so how could he not find his mom in the middle of Gotham City? So Batman and Superman should both have motivations so strong it moves them to act no matter what. And throughout the third act, they should be learning from each other. So by the end, they join forces because they've come to mutually respect each other. So let's talk about both Batman and Superman's motivations to develop them in a way that moves them inexorably to the finale where they finally join forces. So what was Batman's motivation in the original movie? Well, his motivation seemed to be that he wanted to kill Superman because he thinks his very existence to the planet is a threat, and he blames him for all of the destruction that happened in Metropolis. And then he changes his mind because he finds out that Superman's mother has the same name as his mother. So let's come up with a better motivation for him. Now, he sees Superman as a threat because of his unlimited power, of course, but it's not just that. He also thinks Superman doesn't care enough about humanity. I mean, sure, he goes around saving people, but it's not at any risk to himself. And whenever it comes down to it, it always seems like he puts his personal interest first, such as when it comes to his mother and Lois. He doesn't seem to be concerned about whether or not others die if someone he cares about is threatened. So Batman's turning point would come when he's fighting Superman. So there comes a point where Batman is so blinded by rage that he puts innocent people in danger, and Superman gladly takes the hit in order to save those people. And this makes Batman realize that he's let his anger and his worry blind him. What he didn't see in Metropolis was everything that Superman put himself through to save innocent people during that battle. And in a perfect world, we would have actually seen Superman attempt to save people during the battle in Man of Steel, above and beyond the 1 or 2 cases that were in the actual film. So because of Superman's compassion for others, Batman wins, but it's a bittersweet victory for him, because at this point, he's coming to the realization about the man he has become in order to win this fight. He realizes that he too has more power than the average human, just like Superman, and he is misusing it. So finally, Lois comes to save Superman, and she says something about how just because people have great power, it doesn't mean that they're a threat. Sometimes the world needs those people to stick up for those who are weaker than themselves. And Lois could even say something about how when she was a girl, she used to think that Batman was doing some good in Gotham, but now he is a far cry from a hero. So now, Batman has organically come to Superman's side in this story. Now what about Superman? Well, Superman's motivation in the original movie was that he thought that Batman was being a terrible person. He was acting outside the law and he was branding people. And on a side note here, there seems to be no reason why he couldn't have taken Batman to the police immediately, especially if he felt that strongly that what he was doing was wrong. But then, in the movie, Lex kidnaps Superman's mother, and for some reason, the only way that Superman can save her is to have Batman on his side, which, in this case, feels rather contrived. So now, let's come up with a better motivation for him. So he finds out that Batman has come out of hiding and is doing some really bad things, But he sees that Batman did a lot of good in the past, and he realizes that Batman could be redeemed. So Superman's goal is to try to help him. But by the time it comes to the big fight between Batman and Superman, Superman is really questioning humanity. There had just been that explosion at the courthouse that killed so many people, and Superman feels like humanity might be beyond saving. Every time he tries to help, there are people that just fight against him, and Batman is one of those people. And so he's angered by what had happened, and he redirects that anger at everyone who has been vocal against him, including Batman. And so at the beginning, he half-heartedly tries to talk Batman out of what he's doing, but Batman doesn't listen. And so Superman goes all out. And it's during their confrontation, when Batman is winning, and he's talking out loud about how he views Superman, and how he was there when Metropolis was destroyed, that Superman's views start to change. Superman, through the dialogue that he is hearing, starts to see things from Batman's point of view. And by this point, he's not giving it his all. As Batman is beating him and saying that he let all those people die, Superman starts to break down, and he says that he tried to help them, but he failed, and that he's not even sure if he knows how to be a hero. So Batman realizes that Superman just needs guidance, in the same way that Batman himself has lost his way and needs a little guidance to be a hero again. So then, by the end, Batman shoots some type of kryptonite weapon or something, and it's about to miss Superman and hit civilians, but Superman takes the entire brunt of the blast for them. And so Superman starts to realize what it really means to be a hero. He realizes that it takes sacrifice. And this is one of the first times he's actually had to confront the idea of sacrificing himself to save others. And so he begs Batman not to hurt anyone else after him. He says that he cannot stand to see other people die. And so Batman finally realizes what he's doing, and he starts to help him. And so Superman sees that something got through to him, and that Batman really is a good guy at heart. And it's at this point that they start to work together. Well, those were our steps for fixing Batman v Superman. If you think that there's anything we missed or anything that could have been handled better, please leave a comment. If you like this video, please subscribe, and make sure to come back next week to see another How to Fix video.